Today we have Erin Diedling on the show, and together we explore how trauma goes into the cells and tissues of the body, our personal stories of early and pre-birth trauma and the power in healing these, how the soul moves out of the way in early life trauma, and clearing out the beautiful garbage of what's stuck in the body so that we can fully trust and be in our psychic and energetic gifts. Also included is an intuitive glance of the podcast community and who's connecting in. Hello and welcome. You're listening to the Embody Podcast, a show about remembering and embodying your true nature, inner wisdom, embodied healing, and self-love. My name is Candice Wu, and I'm a holistic healing facilitator, intuitive coach, and artist sharing my personal journey of vulnerability, offering meditations and guided healing support, and having co-creative conversations with healers and wellness practitioners from all over the world. This episode may not be for all audiences. Just be mindful that it includes a discussion of sexual trauma and suicide. This episode is sponsored by the Embodied Healing Group Call that happens once a month. It is a monthly group to enjoy embodied support, empowering connection, and healing guidance for developing your intuition, being at ease in your body and spirit, and tapping into your somatic wisdom and ancestral healing around anything you're experiencing or challenged with each month. You can find out more about this group, which is $55 a month, and all the proceeds support the creation of the podcast at candicewu.com/Patreon. Well, it's really an honor to have Erin Diedling on the show. She has been someone that I've admired from day one. I find her to be incredibly magical, spiritual, and connected. And whenever she tunes into something, I just feel like she's right on. Sometimes she receives information, messages that happen even before I know it. And it's so exciting to hear from her. Erin is a gifted clinical psychotherapist, energy healer, and psychic medium in Chicago, working in two worlds, the science and spirit world. She loves working with the inner baby, with touch regulation and the neuro-sequential stages of development. She works with past complex trauma, eating disorders, and also supporting her clients to manifest their dreams and bringing in love, joy, and beauty. She paints, writes, and swims, and it's just a joy to be around. So without further ado, here is Erin. Okay, so I have Erin Diedling on the show, and I'm super happy to have you here, Erin. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me, Candice. I'm so enjoying getting to know you through your work and through your travels, and I'm really thrilled to be on your show. I think it'll be a lot of fun.
Thank you. Thank you. Likewise, I'm really enjoying getting to know you through Word Up, which is a show for healers from a healer. But first, let's go all the way back to when I first met you. I met you while you were assisting at Somatic experiencing training. And I don't know if you know this, but when I met you, I was just floored by you and your energy and excited by the questions you were asking me and bringing up with me, like instantly. I don't even know how you knew it, but of course you knew it. And you were like, "You're an energy worker. How do you combine everything?" Like,
I was so blown
immediately
away.
This conversation opened up, and I was so happy you were there. It was like, oh thank goodness.
I couldn't believe when I met you. I was like, "Who is this? How does she know all of this? Oh my goodness!" And I got so interested in how you're combining all these different things and also keeping them separate in the different, the clinical world and the spiritual world. And I was just like, who is she? I need to know her. But also there's that, from psychic schools, like, don't get in someone's space and like try to grab their answers because their answers aren't for you. So I always had that sort of like, don't be a space invader. But I was so fascinated by you right off the bat. So sounds like it was mutual.
It was absolutely mutual. So I'd love to hear your journey of how you got to where you are today. You're not only a therapist, you're an energy worker, you're psychic, and you do all sorts of powerful healing and transformation with people.
Well, thank you. It's a wild thing to hear yourself described that way. I sometimes
Is it accurate?
It's accurate. It's just like, wow. Oh, I guess I do all that. Yeah, I do. But it's like
one time I asked you, what do? You listed all these things, and I was just floored. And I remember, I very profoundly remember organ channel healing and organ healing, and now I can't list the other ones, but I'd love for you to share that.
Oh, well, thank you. I have a clinical practice. I'm a clinical psychotherapist, and I'm trained in very much the same thing you're trained in is somatic experience, which is very body focused, nervous system focused. It's a lot about why animals in the wild don't get post-trauma and humans do. And I do think that domestic animals or domesticated animals align to their humans and can, have post-trauma because they're aligned to their humans. But it's a lot about what didn't get to happen in that, the big event, and how do you slow it down and hear the nervous system and listen to the body, because the body has so many of the answers. So there's that piece, which also led me more into clinical touch work, neurobiologically based and neurosequentially based modality, where it helps. One of the many things it does, it's working a lot with the HPA axis, hypothalamus, pituitary, adrenal axis, the three main players of the nervous system, the three musketeers of nervous system regulation. And a lot of times when there's baby trauma or developmental trauma, developmental ruptures from even pre-birth up through adulthood, there's more of a body narrative than there is a talking narrative or a visual narrative. And that modality has taught me how to work with the inner baby. I don't work with children, like actual chronological children. I work with the inner babies and the inner children of the adult. And I say that with full respect. It's really yummy work. I look at my own attachment style and I think it's perfect for me because I don't actually have children. I helped raise my little brother. I had a lot to do with his upbringing, but I wasn't his actual parent, supporting him and financially or whatever. But I see how I can be an ideal parent maybe in a clinical setting, but then they don't go home with me. I'm not responsible for having to do the care the hard work that parents do. I'm more, yes, I'm in theory, but I'm also in practice. And so parents have, I think being a parent is an incredibly sacred, hard job. And I get to sit in my ivory tower and learn all this stuff. And then people come in with their baby trauma and I get to help raise the baby or go into those neurosequential places, meaning certain stages have to be passed to get to the next one. And if we don't pass those stages, sometimes the later stages collapse down on the one that maybe is where the learning needs to take place next.
I'm just catching in on that because I think that this kind of education is so important for understanding what the impact of trauma can be. And, with everything going on around families being separated at the border, I even hear psychologists on TV saying this is traumatic. But I have this sense that they're not exactly even speaking to this neurosequential development that you're speaking about and somatic development, as we know, how the body experiences the trauma and cannot get out of it without certain support.
Well, it was amazing to me that on the big news channels that physicians and psychiatrists were going on, medical doctors talking about the body impacts and nervous system impacts on these little kids at various ages being separated from their parents and how that can affect their health long term. And that it was so mainstream that this ACEs study, adverse child experience study, which actually started out from Kaiser Permanente to be a study on weight management and obesity and why do some people get obese and others don't. And it turned into a trauma study that they didn't And they didn't foresee that it would become that. And what they noticed is all the health problems that can come up from in adults that had adverse, consistent, or either big adverse experiences or consistent over time experiences, such as being separated from parents at the border, neglect, abuse, oppression, all of that, poverty, even, can start to look like trauma.
Absolutely.
And then energetically, how I see that, in the other half of my life where I'm doing energy work, sometimes I see there's a clinical piece and there's an energy piece in how I have perspective on it. Clinically, there's even a local doctor here in Chicago that wrote a book on fibromyalgia, and he firmly believes some of the syndromals, and Somatic Experience talks about this in the trainings, is a lot of the syndromals stem out of baby trauma or developmental trauma, in that the trauma doesn't have a place to go, so it goes into the tissues, or the child will absorb it and they don't have a place to put it, or they try to put it someplace, or, beat up the punching bag and told that's not polite, and so it goes deeper and deeper into the tissues until it gets to the cellular level. And then at some point, it's almost like the body turns on itself because it doesn't have a place to put all of this energy or this neglect or the love it didn't get. There are some physicians that have written books such as The Deepest Well is all about the ACEs study. I think it's Dr. Nadine Burke, I think her last name is. She wrote The Deepest Well, which is all about the ACEs study and her experience with little kids who come from oppression and neglect and abuse. And her story is very hopeful in the book. There's also like When the Body Says No. I think that's Gabor Mate. Bessel van der Kolk has the one, The Body Keeps the Score. And then even a local physician at Whole Health Chicago, in Dr. David Edelberg, wrote a book on fibromyalgia. And he back in the 70s, long before anyone was, before any of this was mainstream, he was saying, I firmly believe things like fibromyalgia it can be trauma caught in the tissues. It doesn't have to be. And I think empirical science will catch up to these theories. And then energetically, I think sometimes it's like, well, I agree to be in a body. I come from this unlimited place. I didn't anticipate all this stuff that would happen. It's kind of bigger than I thought it would be having a human body. So let me get a little bit out of the way. Let me send part of myself away. Or I've seen this sometimes with childhood sexual abuse, where the child will remove themselves from the situation, or remove their soul. Like, okay, fine, you can have my body, but you can't have my soul.
There's the preservation.
And then they just keep moving out of the way and moving out of the way and moving out of the way until there's, there's not a lot of them left to interfere with, say, dis-ease that comes into the body. And I recently, did some healing work with someone who had inoperable cancer. And she's like, I've done all the medical stuff, but I'm totally into energy. And her caregiver sent her to me for a session. And it was really clear that she had moved out of the way. And even like, okay, you can have my body, I'll just move out of the way. Okay, you can have my boundaries, I'll just move out of the way. And even with the cancer cells, it's like, okay, fine, I won't be a problem. And so as she started to come back in, the tumors, my understanding is the tumors are starting to shrink. I mean, she's doing work with a whole care team, so I'm not saying I'm responsible for that or necessarily had to do with that, but it's what I saw when I was doing a reading and a healing.
Yeah. And do you see that as perhaps she's finding that it's safer now, or that the healing can happen now?
Yeah.
She's coming back in her body.
She's a powerful, powerful lady. And so she's coming back full force. I mean, slowly, dipping her toe in and like, okay, I like that. And to see her come alive and displace the cancer, it's something.
That's beautiful. Yeah. Amazing.
Yeah. She's beautiful. She's a just the gentlest, kindest, most loving spirit. And now she's also becoming a badass. She's finding her inner badass or inner cancer fighter.
Oh, yeah. Well, if we just kind of backtrack a little, Erin, I want to hear about your life and how you journeyed into being a healer and psychotherapist. What inspired you, or what really draws you to this work, and what was your story before being in this place in your life?
Well, it's so interwoven with the energy piece. So if I'll try to be brief. It's kind of long. I'll start there. But as a kid, I could read and feel energy, and it wasn't always pretty. Like, we had lived in a house where a major event, and actually a murder, had taken place, and we had just moved to Louisiana. The house where we were going to move into wasn't built yet, so we were renting a house, and I was feeling all of this really scary stuff in the house. And my mom took me to the priest, and the priest was like, no, leave her alone. She has gifts. She has a language that she speaks that needs to be protected and nurtured. He said to my mom, I know you don't understand that, and this was a priest who did exorcisms. I mean, he was a badass, and
wow,
he was protective, and he sent me home, and my mom had a think on that and was like, okay, great. I don't understand this, but there's also a part of me as a child that's like, oh, this is a little much for my mom. So maybe I should dim some of this down. In Louisiana, it's state law. If you know the home is haunted and you are selling your home, you have to disclose it to the new buyers. But we were just renters. And so we weren't privy. We were not made aware that something, and I won't tell the details because they're pretty horrific. But I would feel it in the home, and I would feel the guy walk down the hall, and I'd feel him peer into my room, and then I'd fall asleep terrified.
That's really scary as a child, and not having someone maybe that knows exactly what's going on.
Right. And I didn't have words to describe it. I didn't understand. I would try to describe it, which is when my mom took me to the priest. And then, fortunately, I mean, here's the thing. Validation can go a really long way. So we're on the school bus going to school, and we'd been living in the place 6 months. And one of the kids was like, oh, you live in the murder house. And it's like everything kind of popped, because it was like, oh, that's what I'm feeling.
That's what it is.
I'm not crazy. I mean, in third grade, I wasn't thinking I was crazy. I was just scared and feeling things.
Yeah.
And I felt things that were positive too. And it kind of started to the bigger story of how I got to be a therapist. I indirectly started there. And I would pick up on things, and I think I dimmed it down a bit. And we moved into the house, got some growing up done. And the first couple of weeks of being a new student in high school, we were at Mass. I grew up in a really Catholic family. And we found out at Mass that the boy who had just been over to our house the day before, my brother's best friend had committed suicide, and he had stopped by the house to say goodbye, but we didn't know that's what he was doing. My brother was saying, he just seemed really happy. He'd seemed happier than he'd ever seen him. And as you know, background in energy and being a clinician, he had decided, and they talk about that kind of almost like a glow. And no one knew I also was madly in love with my brother's best friend.
Oh my goodness.
I never told anyone. So my family doesn't tend to listen to things like this. So I don't think they'll find out, but he was very, very kind to me. And he was a star student. He was a star athlete, but just really kind heart and beautiful ethics and beautiful spirit. And I'd even ride my bike past the house, and I'd communicate with him like, hey, what's up, Brian? How you doing? How's heaven? How do you like it? Where are you? And I would feel like he was answering me. And my parents had noticed that I was having a rough time, and I had been through some trauma as a little kid, which is also, I think, why I picked up on energies. Because when you're through a trauma, I know I'm telling this in and out of time a bit, and it all meets up somehow.
Yes, it will.
I think when a kid goes through trauma, and some kids have abilities and don't go through trauma, but I think we send a part of ourselves way, way far away. And then we still have kind of cell phone communication with that part of us that goes far, far away. And it can make us very attuned to energy and where's the next thing coming from, or where do I need to be on defense? Or I think you also get really high level help when you're going through a trauma.
Right. And it seems to me that having a part of you far, far away, and having that communication, the line of communication is open, and the energetic boundary of the part of you that's human, not human, but on the ground in the body, is open then to what else might be coming through.
Yep.
But you said high level support. Is that what you said?
Yeah. If you pull back and look at some of, when I pull back and look at, say, when I was a little tyke and there was sexual abuse going on, and that happened, I'm sorry, that's a big detail to drop. I look and I see how much help, how surrounded I was, that maybe spirit wasn't overriding the will of the abuser or the rapist, but it also was going to be supportive because that maybe wasn't entirely my will to be, a toddler being raped. And so when I pull back and actually sort of look at the bigger picture, I had so much help and I was so lifted up, and I was even healing the abuser. Like, oh, that looks awful. Here, let me take that. But then it doesn't feel so good. And that's where I think some of the ickiness later, some of the heaviness, the anxiety, the depression, when I entered high school or even late grade school, my parents just saw I wasn't thriving and they didn't understand why. And when the thing happened with my brother's best friend, they said, wow, let's take her, let's get her some help. My brother had been in therapy and they thought, maybe Erin needs to be in some therapy too. And they went to go see the therapist and told her what was going on. And I had no idea that she knew for years. She said, based on what you're telling me, I think your daughter's been through sexual abuse at least once. I think she's had at least one big trauma. And I didn't know that. They knew. And they're like, how, when, where, who, how is this possible? Where did we not see? So they were holding on to this information for years before I had the full cognitive. My body remembered, and I would get flashes and I would say things I didn't remember saying about the events, about the rapes. And then later when my mom would remind me things that I would have, like those Freudian slips, I look back and I'm like, oh yeah, I do remember saying that. So there was some part saying help, help. And so they brought me to this wonderful therapist, Dr. Hagen, who was a clinical psychologist. And I wanted to be her. And she encouraged me to do exactly that over the years. And so I saw her from 14 all the way through college and grad school. And I still write her every now and again and just thank her. I don't know where I'd be without her. And she was such a force in just such an advocate. And she's seen every member of my family now, I think, because she was the one clinical psychologist in this small town, which is now a much bigger town. And, she was really good at keeping boundaries and really good at keeping secrets, the things that woman must know about so many families. And she never slipped. She was so buttoned up and so the utmost professional. And she encouraged me. In college, I was interested in literature and therapy. And I started taking pre-med. She's like, what's with this pre-med stuff? Because my grades started to go down. I loved the poetry of organic chemistry and the poetry of physics, but I couldn't cut the math. And she's like, what's with the medical thing? What's with medical school? And I said, if you listen to most people, they will diagnose themselves. And she said, Erin, you don't have to go through the punishment of medical school to listen to most people. Like, I think she said this word. She said, I think you'd be a virtuoso. I was like, I'm a terrible listener. How could I possibly be a therapist? And she's like, I don't know, Erin.
Oh my goodness.
I think you'd be surprised. And I find that I have in the moment in the clinical room, I can listen and be very even hyper focused, not in a like scrutinizing kind of a way, but I notice, you know who it is. It comes over you.
Yeah, it does. You're in that space. And then it sounds like you're listening with not just your ears, but just many levels of your being.
Yes.
And receiving information from images and sense and all sorts of energy and other cues in the body. Yes. Of course.
And I was steered away from it because I didn't think I could cut it. I didn't think I could be her or like her. And she saw and she encouraged me. And what is it? The joke? How do you regulate a therapist? Put a client in front of them. Isn't that?
Oh, that's hilarious.
Sometimes, when people are exhausted at some of the trauma conferences and you have to go and do a practice group, it's amazing how people have just done some of their own, maybe you've had this experience where they've done a lot of their own work and they're emotionally exhausted and then it's time to be the therapist and they're ready to go. Put them in the therapist
chair. That happens to me, traveling a lot. As I told you before the call, there are just different stressors that happen and things that are going on that are out of my control and very unpredictable. Yeah. And sometimes I'm dealing with something and I surprise myself even as to how present I can be with a client, even like minutes after that. I do try to give some buffer time and ground myself and do all sorts of self-care. But if I'm down to the wire and I have to just turn on, I can't. And it's really great.
It kind of comes over you. And there's an equal and opposite joke or equal and other joke about how do you keep a psychic occupied? How do you keep a psychic busy? Give them a problem to solve or put a client in front of them.
So, Erin, I'm curious if you want to go here. When you look at your whole life spiritually, energetically, how do you set these major aspects of your life, some traumatic and some very profound, it sounds like, and beautiful, into an understanding of what's going on for you and why you're here?
I think I'm here to help with this lifting up the planet, to help with this raising the vibration. And as people's gifts are turning on more and more, I hope, and that's one of the things I want to do with my show is connect people to resources. I mean, I connect people. I've connected people to marriages. I've connected people. People call me up for all kinds of things that have nothing to do with therapy or therapy referrals or energy referrals. They're like, do you know I'm a good mechanic? Do you know? Like, I just, so I think one of my missions that's just sort of part of who I am that I don't think about is to connect people and to connect them to each other and to resources. So I think that's maybe part of the spiritual mission that I don't think about much because I just do it. It's just kind of natural, but also in getting the planet and the spirit of the planet to the newer place that we're bringing it to. And you need some way showers and some healers and planetary healers like yourself, where you can travel and ground different parts of the earth and help touch the people, energetically or emotionally in those different parts of the world, like you're doing. I haven't quite figured it out either. With developmental trauma, that's the big thing. Like, why am I here? Why am I
right?
It's so much easier to be in spirit, but I chose body, and I've had a near-death experience, at least one, and I'm like, nope, I'm here. I want to stay. I'm here for a reason. I'm not dying. Yeah, I'm not dying in this place. I'm going to fight through. I had a really bad food poisoning that almost killed me, and I remember the angels coming, and I remember like the start of the white tunnel. I'm like, nope, not going. No, thank you. I know it's a really beautiful, magical place, but not yet. So
wow,
that gave me.
And you felt that clear choice.
Yeah, that gave me a lot more fight. And I didn't know anyone. I was in Bali by myself, and I didn't know anyone. And I'm like, I'm not going to do that to my family. I'm not going to die where no one knows that I'm here and no one would know I'd be dead. And
that sounds
screw that.
Yeah.
Like
I'm so glad you didn't die and choose to die. The world needs you.
The world needs you.
And you get to have your life. That's, yeah.
And that was very healing too, though, because I think with developmental trauma, there is a lot of that resignation. Like, I'm not going to hurt myself, but if I go in my sleep, no problem. And that's normal, actually, for developmental. I don't want to say what, I don't want to maybe gloss over and say that's always normal, but it's quite common to find with developmental trauma, people who aren't quite fully in life and aren't quite committed, that there's a little piece of them that's away or a little, and now when, like my brother's friend, when you actually start taking steps, that's a whole other story. With developmental trauma, it's a little bit more resignation or collapse. It's not so much, I'm going to do this and make this happen. The near-death experience definitely fixed me of the wanting to fade away. So it was a healing in that sense, because it brought back my fight, which is a big principle of somatic experience, right? And why animals in the wild don't get post-trauma is because they, once they come out of that collapse or that play dead state, that automatic physiological state of freeze or shock, or in possums, like playing dead, there's a scary fight that comes behind it. It's scary to go into freeze. It's really scary to come out because it's so big.
Yeah. And it's so interesting that you're coming out of freeze, or parts of you coming out of freeze in that situation. And the fight, I don't know how you'd characterize it, but from the outside, the fight had to do with the food and the nourishment.
Mind blown. So true.
That's just interesting to me because it wasn't about the sexual trauma or about X, Y, or Z. It was about the food.
That was a big piece to work on after it, and to recover my gut. It took me 10 years to get my gut back. It took me a couple of years to get it back from that food poisoning. It was being able to receive nourishment that shows up a lot with developmental trauma, like deserving nourishment, deserving warmth, deserving love, being worthy of having a body, being worthy of kindness. Like those are big items. And
they're huge in the developmental and life in general.
Yeah. And sometimes I will find both in myself, but also in, clients are often a reflection of us, that receiving the kindness, receiving the good words, receiving the nourishment, that it's almost painful to take it in. If you're used to not having it, you start to make subconscious rules about, if I can't take it in, or if I didn't get the nourishment, I must not deserve it, and that these messages from the hypnotic state we're in, like the mind's in a little hypnotic state until about 3 or 4 years old, sometimes until about 7, where we just absorb what the big people are doing with no challenge. Like, oh, that's how to do relationship. That's how to do nourishment. That's how to do love. That's how to do work. That's how to do money. And then we just walk around, and it goes into and then it embeds.
And we're wired for that.
And then it's like, how did I end up in my parents' marriage, or how did I become, my grandpa? It's wired, or it got wired in, and then there's like an autopilot that can come up unless we start to come in and challenge it, or overcome, or make our choices.
So when you're doing inner baby work, I'm thinking about inner baby and pre-birth.
Yeah.
And what do you find interesting about, or how do you work with pre-birth, prenatal, and the whole period before you're actually in the womb or born?
Yeah. Well, there are two answers to that. There's the clinical and there's the energetic. And there are a lot of places where the clinical and the energetic overlap. I actually have a questionnaire, a document that I ask, like, what was going on in your life? What was going on when you were gestating? Politically, what were the popular songs? What was in the culture? Where your mom was gestating with you, was it safe? Like, was mom in a war zone? Were there natural disasters? Was it just the most wonderful experience ever? I like to emphasize. I don't like to lead people into the negative stuff. The questionnaire just kind of asks generally, like, what was happening politically? Did your mom have certain cravings? How did they find out that they were pregnant with you? What were you told? And the thing is, the little one, from the time the nervous system starts to develop, it will start to record sensation. Whatever people believe, and I don't mean to step on political or religious toes, just from when the nervous system will begin to register sensation once it's formed enough to register sensation. And I actually, personally, I've gone back and I remember trying to climb up my mom's. I was in a session in Somatic experience when I was an SE student, and I was like, I think this looked a little heavier than I anticipated. So I tried to climb up my mom's spine, but I didn't have hands. And the woman looked at me and she goes, "Look at your hands. You don't have hands yet." And my fists were like rolled in, and it was like my wrists were sticking out. And,
yeah.
And I said, but there was almost like an energetic, nope, you're staying. And I like to think in energy, we have a lot of choice. And so I'm not sure what made that choice for me, but I felt overridden. And because I feel like the little ones come from this magical, unlimited place. And it's like, yeah, great, I'll take a body, no problem. Whoa, gravity. Whoa, time.
Right.
All that,
What's all this?
Yeah. And so I was like, no problem. Sexual abuse, I got that. I'm an unlimited being. It'll be fine. When I get out, look out. And then I was like, whoa, this is bigger than I thought.
Oh my goodness. Right.
So that was my experience. But getting to work with the inner baby and the pre-birth, I'll ask people, like, what do you know? What do you know about your gestation? What do are there funny, fun stories that your parents have told you? With adopted kids, it gets interesting if they don't know about the birth parent, but their little nervous systems were there. And so their little systems were recording sensation and recording the field and the level of acceptance around them being the anticipation of their birth. Like, it was there joy all around? Was everyone thrilled? Couldn't wait. Mm-hmm. Like when my baby brother was announced, I was just on pins and needles. I couldn't wait to meet this little guy or girl. I didn't know.
Yeah.
And there was just so much. He healed the whole family, coming in and totally unexpected. I had given up praying for a little brother or sister. I was like, that's never going to happen. And years later, surprise.
Oh my goodness. What's the age difference?
13 years.
Wow. Yeah. So you had given up.
Yeah. I was the baby. And then he came along and I got to help raise him. We all got, like, my older brother and I got to name him, and he was so wanted. And so his kids, now he has kids. And so I get to be the auntie, but in some ways they feel almost like I hear all the grandparents describing the experience. And I'm like, it kind of feels like that too. 'Cause I raised him. I helped raise him. And we all did. Wow. He had 4 parents. My parents,
that's a lot of parents.
And my older brother and me.
Goodness. Well, Erin, one of the most profound experiences that I've had with pre-birth, I did that when I had no idea about energy, really. I mean, it was just very early on. I was doing EMDR with a therapist, and she was like, let's work on being in the womb. Because all of the work that we'd done already was the early trauma work and early development and infant, inner baby, everything. And then she's like, let's go farther.
Whoa.
And I was like,
how was that?
Well, coming from the place of like, what the hell do you mean? How are we supposed to do that? Like, I just didn't understand at that point in my life how that could even be possible. and how we would do it or how it would be accurate. Like I was concerned with it being right in some way, or like that I was getting the right information. And I didn't have that much trust for just what my inner being would tell me. It was just developing.
Yeah.
And so this was a huge step to it. She was like, well, we would do EMDR with tuning into just your impression of what it was like when you were in the womb. And so we did talk a little bit about those things you're saying, like,
right, because you were there.
What was going on?
There's the story we're told, if we have a story, and then there's actually what happened.
Right.
Because you were there.
And so we have the felt sense if we can just allow it to come through. And so, yeah, we talked about how my mom would go to the park every day and cry because she was really upset about her marriage and left someone behind in Hong Kong. She was in the States, and she would go and cry because she missed him every day. And I remember asking my mom, like, were you excited to have me? What were your feelings about being pregnant? And she was like, I don't know, nothing. And I was so devastated, you know, I was like, nothing, like you weren't like overjoyed or waiting for me. And I just had all these ideas of what I wanted, right? Which said a lot about what I was missing and where she was
How did you find out the crying? Was that from your impression, or did she finally tell you?
Well, she had told me that maybe 5 years prior, and just out of conversation. And I never thought anything of it. And so it did lead back to this healing work that I was doing. And so I was like, oh, this is what I know about it. And it did lead me to ask her more, which then in turn gave me the responses of, no, I don't know, nothing. I didn't think about anything during pregnancy.
No, I just cried every day, right? But nothing.
Yeah, right. You remember that, but not anything else. So when I did tune into it, I felt horribly depressed. And like, this was a dark, dark world. And I think, you know, now looking back at that work and just in general, I do think a part of me had already left. Like a part of me didn't come all the way. And so it was like, I had already, you know, a half part of me, or only some part of me was coming into this human form. Almost
like a preemie, because a lot of preemies are in two worlds.
Oh, interesting. Can you say more?
Well, I heard that. And sometimes it's not about like, I'm going to go and dwell on the past. It's more like, if you can name it, it can explain your whole life, and then you have more choice.
Yes. Right. It can free you from the things that it affected and it echoed outward. And then you're like, oh, I don't have to live by those bounds anymore.
I remember going to the NICU. A colleague had a premature little one. And I remember being in the room. Parents were around the incubator. So, you know, so much love and so much sweetness. And the nurse would come in and out. And I would notice, like, the little one, sometimes he'd open his eyes and he'd be like, yeah, okay. Yeah, I'm out. And so it just seemed like his soul and spirit would come in, check things out, and be like, okay, the nurses, my body's got this handled. The medical team, my mom's got it handled. I don't know about those grandparents, but okay, bye. And then he just like pop in and out, like he wasn't totally invested, and other people were keeping his body well, and other things were keeping his body well, including his body. That the body has its own genius. Yeah. And I've heard it said that preemies have a foot in two worlds, that it's in the world of the spirit and in the world of the earth. And I wasn't a preemie, but that really hit home. So the idea that maybe that's why I relate to you so much is how you said a part of you had already checked out. A part of you had already gone away.
And now, right. And now you're making me wonder how that shows up in the family constellations perspective. You know, if part of the baby, the new soul that's coming in is still in the other world, in spirit world, who are they with? And why are they there? There's something there. Perhaps. I don't know. I haven't exactly worked in that with that scenario. It hasn't exactly come up. But I will tell you, a very healing experience around this whole story of mine is that one family constellation that I did with myself and have also facilitated for others when it's intuitively called upon and like what's needed is just curling up in a ball. And the facilitator was like, everyone just gather around like it's a womb. And everyone surrounded me and like hugged me.
Wow.
While I was curled up in a ball. And I mean, I know that some people do like rebirthing experiences. It wasn't like a prescribed rebirthing experience, but it was everything you're saying about the energetic field and the feeling sense that you're coming into and restoring and correcting that. And so everyone was surrounding me and I was, of course, bawling. And the facilitator was like, everyone here loves you and is expecting and waiting for you to come. And you can come at your own pace, but they're just expecting and waiting for you and they love you. And it was like the perfect, most magical thing ever.
Wow.
So, I mean, if you're listening to this, if you're out there listening to this, and this is really touching or tugging some part of you, listen to that because there may be something that your inner baby wants or is receiving around that image. And I don't know about you, Erin, but whenever we're working with infancy or pre-birth, it's such a tender,
and there aren't words,
tender place.
It's such a profound felt sense. Was that incredibly reparative for you? Were you able to have it?
Incredibly. You know, the interesting thing too, speaking of when you were saying it's not necessarily about going to the past and just rehashing it all for no good reason. What was going on around that time in my adult present day life was that I was getting ready to birth myself into healing work in the way that I wanted to. Like my spirit wanted to, and all of me wanted to, not just the clinical parts of me and not just the parts of me that do yoga, but all of it together. And I was scared and I wasn't sure the world wanted it. And, you know, now it's like, well, that may or may not matter because it's part of my desire if the world wants it. But developmentally, it was something I needed to feel for myself.
Absolutely.
And it completely related to birth.
And there are some theories that say how we come in, how we gestated, how we come into the world can in many ways shape our lives. And like you were saying, you know, you have more choice or the echoes are there, but then now that you know that, you can have more clarity on how to move forward. Sometimes even just naming it.
And just to feel that worth and feel that reception of love from the outside. It's such a different experience than feeling like, I don't know if the world cares about me or values me, or do I even exist? Those are all, you know, things that had gone on in me because of developmental disruptions and the lineage and all sorts of things. But, you know, speaking of that research you're saying, Erin, there's also, it reminds me of some research that I was learning about when I was in grad school that I think it was in the EMDR research where some people found that people who killed themselves would kill themselves in a similar format as a birth trauma. So if it was like, if it was a birth that was drug induced, then maybe they OD'd on some drug.
Or if the cord was wrapped around their neck, then I don't even want to say it, but
exactly. Or if there were forceps, right? If it was a breathing issue or heart rate stopping, that there was some mimicking that would go on later.
Wow.
If that correlated, if someone was, obviously it's not causation, but they just found that correlation with people who had committed suicide.
And
so
and you can do empowering work around those. I've seen people do, you know, birth work on the table and, you know, where they still have, or where the swelling will come up in the head where the forceps were. Because that was very common to, until a certain date to put mom to sleep and just pull the little one out with forceps or whatever. And I think up until the 50s, maybe early 60s, and it's in The Crown. I don't know if you watched the show The Crown, but I think her first two babies, they just hand the babies to her after she wakes up, and then when she has Andrew, she's awake and pushing. So you can see where the cutoff was, or where the new theories came in.
Wow.
But I've seen people on the therapy table in class for the clinical touch work where they're repairing how they came in, and the swelling in the head where the forceps were touching, and to just even just gently place a hand there. It was, I'll never forget this moment. The instructor was doing a demonstration with one of the students, and he had his hand where the forceps would have hit on her head or would have clamped down. And what a way to come in.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember her hand, she's a grown woman, and her hand came up and wrapped a couple of fingers around his thumb like a baby would. And I was just he's like, did you see that? And I was like, I saw that. It's so fascinating.
Wow. It's amazing.
So there is reparative work that can be done without having to harm oneself. But
absolutely,
I think the patterns come up so that not because life is harsh, but so that we can heal it in a place where we're more empowered than maybe we were when we were coming into the world helpless. Somewhat helpless.
Absolutely. Well, I want to shift gears here, Erin, because I'm also very interested in your work with supporting people when their gifts are opening up and turning on. And can you speak a little bit about what you mean by that, so our listeners can understand what that means, and also what kinds of things that people notice in themselves when their gifts are turning on?
Yeah, and I guess I just use the lingo, and I don't even think that doesn't make sense to everybody. I think kids are born intuitive. We're in touch with energy. Animals in the wild have senses that in some ways we turn off as humans. They have an intuition or a knowing, and we have intuitions and knowings, and some people have them more than others. And depending on what kind of level of acceptance there was, maybe in the home or the community or the school, we may turn those gifts down. Or they may just be dormant in us all our lives. And then we reach a point in, say, adulthood or adolescence when we start to come in touch with energy or feel energy or see auras, or see that almost the matrix, whether we actually see a visual or kind of see it in a knowing understanding. And it deserves support. So that's what I mean when someone's gifts are turning on. They turn on in different ways, and there's more and more permission on the planet. I think little ones are coming in way more in touch with energy. The newer generations are just, it's almost like they're high def babies, that high definition babies that they already have their skills and abilities built in, and we're not going to teach it out of them. But I think just this week I had 4 or 5 referrals from people whose energy gifts, whose awareness, whose spiritual aspects of self are turning on in different ways, and they kind of don't know what to do with it. Or when you have that level of communication, it's important to get communicated with.
Yeah.
And you probably find this as an energy worker. It's not work that can be done in a vacuum. It can feel isolating, and there's so many other people out there that can communicate with you about energy. And sometimes it's cool to talk to someone that came from a different tradition, someone who's maybe more Christian or more into angels or more into astrology. And my tradition, the training I went through, I actually dabbled in lots of schools. My agreement I actually attended a psychic school, and the agreement was to only take classes at that school. But I was like Hermione, and I double dipped, and I would take classes from schools around the country online while I was also taking classes in person, just to see how other people did it. And I think it's important to have communication and have ongoing communication. I would guess I'm not musically inclined in any way, but if you play the violin, it might be nice to play the violin with someone else or have a coach or
absolutely, just to have that support and
community,
the feedback, and the encouragement.
And so one of the things I like to do with someone when their gifts are turning on is look at what are their strongest gifts. Are they intuitive? Do they have the thing where they can hold an object and tell you the history of the object? Are they master manifestors? Are they empaths? Lots of people are empaths, and where you can literally feel the emotion of another person. And I think that's hardwired into us, and we can be more or less attuned to it. There's clairvoyance where you see images. There's clairaudience where you hear answers and you actually know that they're your answers, as opposed to, or the difference between what's your voice and what's an other voice, not to be confused with schizophrenia, which that is the official definition of schizophrenia, is you hear voices and you see visions and whatnot. But maybe the DSM-6 will will negotiate that. But someone who is clairaudient knows, oh, that's my higher self talking to me, or that's not a right answer for me. That's just fuzz. That's just the microphone rubbing against my sweatshirt.
Right.
That's an inside joke with Candice and me, because my microphone was rubbing against my sweatshirt while we were doing the interview.
We don't weave it in. Love it.
So communication is important. So when people come to me, I give them some communication, and usually I just send them off on their own. And a friend of mine gave me a talking to and said, because I have hangups about making people feel obligated, and lots of coaches are saying, oh, you have to sell packages. And I resist the living daylights out of selling packages, because I feel like I'm more of a point of use kind of person, and people know what they need, and they'll come in if they need something, or they'll ask for a referral. And my friend was like, no. You're helping people. You're giving them their first communication on turning their abilities on, or you're giving them a psychic reading for the first time. And that reading alone is helping them turn on their abilities. You can't just set them off and not at least leave the door open. I was like, oh, the door is always open. She said, well, you need to make that clear, because if you send them off with this new ability, they might feel a little crazy going back into the world. And so I've had to rethink that.
I think that ongoing support. Yeah. It's like so important, because then as you turn on and it enhances or it gets clearer, you're more plugged in. Different things, I think different things can happen there.
Yeah. What do you do with it?
With clients or with myself?
With people that say their abilities are turning on, they reach out to you. What do you do? Or is that a niche for you? I mean, I assume it is, because you've turned yours on. Yeah,
it's, I find that I have very intuitive clients in general, and empathic clients. I don't always get someone saying those words to me, but I get the words that they're feeling, they're getting more information, or they're having different insights. How do they cultivate that? Or how do they cultivate their intuition, or the ability to do any one of those things that you're saying? How do they use that? Because they want to. Usually I'm getting the people that want to use those gifts for some purpose that's helpful or joyful for them and others around them. But I just go with what they're experiencing and really validate it. That's like the biggest thing.
Yeah.
A lot of times people say, oh, isn't it weird that I get this? Wow, I have this image right now. It's so weird. You might think I'm weird. And so I'm like deconstructing, like ripping off the weird Band-Aid.
Yeah. Not weird at all.
And it's like, it's not. Right. And recently someone just felt like, wow, okay, if I take the weird idea off of my plate, then what can happen? And when she did, she found herself in so much flow and information, but that she was actually very readily and easily navigating it.
Nice.
naturally.
Yeah. So she took the judgment piece off.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. To answer your question, I think it's just very different depending on with what they're coming in with and where they're at with it. I'm usually working with clearing away belief sets around it. That's judgment or fear, and why there's fear. And maybe that's to do with past life or present life or lineage. And then that generally helps them feel at ease with the gifts. And then they can just be on more naturally. And then just seeing how they can find the answer themselves. If they're like, well, what do I do with this? And they just feel into it. They're like, oh, okay, I do know what to do. So I think one of my major gifts with people is clearing the garbage.
Yes.
And it's not quite garbage. It's beautiful debris. It's just, we might see it as garbage, but it's clearing away all that stuff that is preventing what's naturally wanting to come through.
Nice.
And then the natural gift can just be harnessed and shine. And I imagine that's what you're doing too, Erin.
Oh, thanks.
Completing pieces.
I give a lot of permission, I think, is how I would put it. And even just hearing you talk, I'm like, oh, since I left psychic school, I've actually become more intuitive, because one of the reasons I learned so much, I'm so grateful to that school. And there were particular traditions and ways to do things, or that was my perception. And it was very much about sixth chakra and coming from your clairvoyance. And that's where your neutrality is. Don't come from your heart, because then, you're just going to be one with everyone. How are you going to know who you are? So I had all this judgment about heart, and, we're not into angels, and we're not into this. And so
it's a lot of limitations.
And I'm still unpacking that, years later, unpacking sort of the tradition. And I'm not saying, like, that was my interpretation of the rules, plus my own resistance to actually listening. And so now it's like, well, does the Mexican place look like a better place to eat, or do I feel like Thai food? So I know it's kind of a silly thing, or the GPS is,
it's a real thing. It's a real daily thing.
Well, intuitive eating, that's a big piece of recovering, helping people recover from eating disorders. Is, what is your body asking for and why? Or what is it just asking for, and let it. But even with GPS or something, like, she's telling me to turn this way, but my gut says go that way. So, I drive by psychic as well. Like, this just doesn't feel right to me. And I feel like I have become more intuitive and had more permission, and was fascinated by people who had the permission, to just listen to, like, clear away the garbage, as you say, the beautiful garbage.
Yeah. That's wonderful. So, Erin, what would you say is one thing people can do if they're out there listening and they want to harness their gift or intuition or their ability to see energy, feel or see energy? What would you recommend?
I'm kind of a learning junkie, so I would encourage maybe finding some information, whether it's through another person, through a video, through meditation, through your podcast,
through your talk show.
Thanks.
Definitely. It's called Word Up, and she has awesome guests on there that I think are talking about this too, right? Yeah, that was really fun.
Quite a show. So if they're feeling a little lost about it, maybe getting some information. And another step is getting community around it. If it's a healer that they could go get an appointment with just to get a hello, or, there's some wonderful non-denominational spiritual communities, or denominational, wherever you're called to, that I think it's so important to be in community with others, even if it's just one friend who speaks that same kind of energy language and love of energy language, to maybe not be so alone in it, because
absolutely
energy is meant to flow, right? energy is a currency, and what does currency means? To flow, and to get communication on it, and consider sharing your gifts with yourself or others. Those gifts are turning on for a reason, and they're trying to take you good places.
I love that you said sharing it with yourself, because that's very powerful and very sweet.
Well, thank you. I guess another thing would be getting grounded around it. That sometimes the energy stuff can feel a little like woo-woo or out there, and it's sort of like a boat in the water. You can get tossed around a bit by the waves and whatever's going on in the world or whatever's going on at work or in the home. And that stillness, that connection to the earth, like the meditation you did in Zion, that was so beautiful. That the stillness is a really great way to share the gift with yourself, that connection to the earth or whatever it is that gets you grounded and centered, and has you in an opportunity to have stillness. And also know that sometimes there are plenty of things that will resist the stillness.
Yeah.
Like, oh, I want to go to the gym, and being at the gym is easy. It's getting to the gym that sometimes is the hard part. Like,
Yep. And all the things that come up when you decide to have stillness and you're just moving through. Well, Erin, this is something we didn't talk about before, but as we're closing the show today, if this is interesting to you, the idea I had was, would you do, or we could do a quick reading on, I hesitate to say reading for me because it's not what I do, but whatever you call it, sensing in or reading the energy of whoever's listening, the community that's listening. At the moment that they're going to listen.
Yeah, I see.
You want to try that?
Yeah, I'm sensing in. Are
Okay,
we going to do it together?
We could. I don't mind to do it with you, but I'm also happy if you don't want to do it by yourself. Either way.
Can we do it together? I just love reading with other people. It's or taking intuitive glances.
Yes, I like that. That's exactly what my thought was, an intuitive glance. I love those words.
And what I'm seeing, just even before you said the whole thing, I closed my eyes and I was seeing my little nephew's music school. So they've got some comfy places to sit and big open area to almost like a cross between a yoga room and a playroom and a music school. And I just see different people. I see a lot of females, more female than male, and sitting on these comfy cushions and yoga mats and like listening intently. Your voice is very soothing. And
ditto to you.
Thank you. And I see a few women in particular that are like, yeah, yep, check, like checking off lists in their mind, or checking off like, yep, I got that. And so it's just validating, like, yeah, I already knew that. Yeah, that's me snapping in the background. But hearing it made it so obvious that they already know.
Yeah.
It's like, I didn't even need to listen to that. I knew that already, but the hearing it and getting the communication on certain gifts or it looks like some things popped. I'm also seeing some people having insight around baby stuff and getting curious about their own births and gestations, and some people that had really wonderful births and deliveries and welcomings. So I'll stop and ask you, what are you sensing?
A couple of things. I feel this sense of some women being like, I am done. I am just done. And for whatever that means for them, but there's this sense of shedding off something that has been
beautiful garbage.
Yeah. Closing in on them. that doesn't make sense anymore. And I sense some grief around that, or other things around the baby stuff. And then the other feeling sense I get is that some people are experiencing or may experience different emotions around this conversation and may or may not be left with it, and they may not have words for it. And I think I'm taking a deep breath as I say it. It feels really good to say it, is that it's just a reminder, if that is happening to anyone out there, that it very well could be some pre-birth or nonverbal stuff, and to not be, it may feel scary, but to not be scared off by it, because there's a way to name it, there's a way to place it and heal it if it needs healing. But the experience that something is happening in my body and I have no idea why. That's what I'm getting.
Yeah. And that this isn't so much a reading as it is information, but when I interviewed my touchwork instructor, he talked about that verbal narrative, and when we have the baby stuff, the things that happen in the womb or that happen in early life, that there will be these unexplained aches or pains or unexplained emotions. And that's, I think that might be some of what you're speaking to. And more on the psychic plane, an intuitive plane, this classroom I'm seeing is like an astral classroom where people gather and come in and out. And some are, it's almost a ritual to come to this classroom that you have created. And that we've kind of put a healing sphere around the globe and around the people that are listening to it now and will listen to it in the future, or listening to it more immediately when it is released, and then we'll be listening to it later. And that there's a community in this classroom that you have created on the astral plane where people come in and out of.
I love that.
And I'm seeing some of the women in this room, and some of the men are, and all across the gender spectrum are. So, some of the individuals who come in here are regulars and are like ready for your next, like waiting for the next release, waiting for, say, this episode, or like the regularity of it. And that it is a place of community, and it is a place of communication on the astral plane, and that it can be communicated with even when this isn't playing. That it's like a place to go and get resources, or get a hello, or get poured into, and be like, "Hey, got some support." That there's a feeling of being part of something when listening to your podcast. That you have created a classroom. So it's a reading about the audience, but it's also a bit about you too and what you're creating.
Yeah. Thank you. That's really helpful to hear that.
Yeah.
I can feel that very much. And I love that. It's definitely what I hope that people feel from it, and want everyone to feel welcome in that community, in this community. And there's a place for all of you.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Erin. Where can people find you? I know you're on YouTube, Erin Diedling, right?
Yes.
Word up.
Yes, that's my channel. My name is.
We'll link it in the show notes. You can take a look. Yeah.
And my website.
And your website?
It's my name, www.erindiedling.com. And they can call. I don't know if you want me to leave the phone number, but it's in the US. So.
That's okay. We'll put it in the show notes, or in the links, so that people can reach you.
Great. It's on the website too.
Yeah. Good. Thank you so much. It's such an honor. I had so much fun. I learned a lot.
I learned a lot.
Of course.
It's such an adventure. I never know where the conversation is going to go. And it takes all these these switchbacks and turns and cool. And I learned so much. And I just love being around your presence. I just love being around you. And even if it's while you're in Spain and I'm in Chicago on a snowy day, like it's just so yummy to be around you. I know I keep using that word yummy, but it is.
It is so yummy to be around you, Erin. Thank you so
Thank you for having me on the show. What a treat.
Thank you so much to Erin, who was on the show today, and for you out there listening. Thanks for joining us. It's just so wonderful when you talk with somebody or you hear a conversation and you feel like you're inspired to learn more about something. I hope that this episode did that for you today. And if you have any questions, reach out to me or Erin. We're happy to connect with you. I'm so inspired by Erin's attention to detail in the science of things, as well as her expansiveness in intuiting information, not to mention the touch work and the neurosequential stages of development and pre-birth stuff. I love that work. So I'd love to hear what excites you about this conversation. Feel free to reach out again and take care until next time. I look forward to connecting with you again on the Embody podcast.